right, so for this week's podcast, I want to talk about the Minnesota Vikings free agency wish list. So we're about 2 weeks away from the legal tampering period, and I want to go over some potential high-end free agency players or free agent players that the Vikings can look to sign outside of the in-house free agents, of course. And before I hear anything about with what cap space, they have no cap space, with what money, the Vikings, they're in salary cap hell. Yeah, well, right now they are, and that's why you have a general manager. Folks, the moves are out there. The moves are there for the Vikings to free up enough cap space to not only sign a top-tier free agent, but also sign all of their draft picks in 2020. It's all about whether Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer are willing to do that. And of course, we have to assume that the majority of the needs for the Vikings heading into next season will be addressed through the draft. So we're talking about one potential player out of the many that I'm going to go ahead and list before. And actually, I already talked about how the Vikings can free up more than enough cap space to make this work. I've done it before. I'm not going to talk about it again. Go back and watch that video. Before we get started, people of Minneapolis, this is for you. One of you out there will win a $25 gift card to Modest Brewing, now the official brewing partner of the Mediocre Best Sports Podcast. That's right, damn it. Located at 505 North 3rd Street. Go out there, enjoy a brewski or two. In order to win that $25 gift card, let me know, who do you think, who is your number one free agent that the Minnesota Vikings should sign? Tweet us your thoughts with the hashtag ModestTake. One winner will be selected at random, in which case it will be announced on next week's podcast, either Wednesday or Thursday. I'll also tweet it out there and maybe put it out on Facebook if you have a Facebook profile. Moving forward, what are the 2020 Minnesota Vikings needs for this offseason? Well, on offense, outside of offensive line, quite honestly, we good. And for my money, the Minnesota Vikings, they have the best collection of skill players in the entire NFL. Obviously, Michael Thomas is better than Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, but I'm talking about Stephon Diggs plus Adam Thielen plus Irv Smith Jr. plus Kyle Rudolph plus Dalvin Cook plus Alexander Mattison. They've got some players, the best collection of skilled players in the league for my money anyway. But going to the offensive line, left guard, let's talk about it. I don't want to hear anything about moving Riley Reiff, an offensive tackle, to left guard. Can we go ahead and stop that? And I'm only talking about this because it was reported that Mike Zimmer recently, and this was brought up last year too, but they didn't do it. But so far, according to reports from the Combine, Mike Zimmer expressed that he's open to possibly moving Riley Reiff to left guard. And the crazy thing is, I don't know why this would be a discussion anyway, because we have recent history to suggest that this would be a terrible fucking idea. Remember Mike Remmers, a serviceable right tackle, in which case they then moved him to guard, and it was a disaster. I swear Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer, they sabotaged that man's career. And really I don't know how often this has been experimented with or how much this has worked out. But think about offensive tackles where it's speed, lateral movement. You basically, as long as you can stay in front of your man, everything else, if you get bulldozed over a couple of times, so be it. But the primary factor is stay in front of your man, because if they hit you outside, then you're done with. If you're playing the interior offensive line, guard or center, you don't have any space to work with. So you're talking about mano y mano, power cleans, all that stuff, just strength versus strength. And I don't know if that would be a good idea for Riley Reiff to go from left tackle to left guard. But the left guard list to work with, you've got Joe Thuney from the New England Patriots. You've also got Graham Glasgow from the Detroit Lions. Both are massive upgrades over Pat Elflein, in which case, this point in his career, after 2 disappointing seasons in a row, this man should be a backup, nothing more. To me, this is the most important position to address in the entire offseason for the Minnesota Vikings. You have to figure out the problem or the solution to address the problem with left guard. Because like Rick Spielman talked about during his combine presser, offensive line, it starts in the trenches. With Kirk Cousins, he needs protection. You can't have Pat Elflein be your starting left guard. Not without competition, at least. Left tackle, maybe. And I'm only talking about this maybe because Riley Reiff, he's serviceable. He's average at best. certainly you could do better, but you could also do worse if you decide to replace him. If you are going to go ahead and replace Riley Reef through free agency, the only player that I'm looking at is Andrew Whitworth, who is currently a free agent from the LA Rams. Unless, and I wouldn't fault the Minnesota Vikings for doing this, unless you decide to swap Brian O'Neill from right tackle to left tackle. I'm neither for or against this move. I would understand why the Vikings would do it. On one hand, you're talking about this dude is one of the best offensive linemen in the league. But if you move him to left tackle, he could flourish there, protect Kirk Cousins' blind spot. On the other hand, you might be better off leaving well enough alone at right tackle with Brian O'Neill. So if you do decide to move Brian O'Neill to left tackle, then the possible free agents to fill in at right tackle, that void there, Jack Conklin out of Tennessee or Brian Bulaga, the Green Bay Packers right tackle. Or worst case scenario, you could flip-flop Brian O'Neill to left tackle and Riley Reef to right tackle, or you could just leave well enough alone. I understand whatever moves they decide to do with that. Those two tackle spots, we'll just have to see how they do that. That's all there is on offense. So definitely left guard, left tackle, maybe. Let's go to defense, where this is just an absolute shit show. Defensive tackle. I think you've got enough in-house now. You need to replace Linval Joseph and Shamar Stephen unless Linval Joseph is going to come back at $3 or $4 million a year. I think you should go ahead and replace the both of them because the interior pressure just wasn't there in 2019. I think you have replacements in-house where you can start Jalen Holmes and Armon Watts. But if you are going to make a move through free agency for defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave from Pittsburgh. Now, you want to talk about a motherfucker that just comes through the line of scrimmage like a fucking Hummer, bro? He comes through the line of scrimmage like a bulldozer, but he also has the hand chop moves to finesse his way around his man at the same time. This is, for me, the number one defensive tackle in free agency this offseason. You also have DJ Reader out of Houston, and you want to talk about a dude that plays to the whistle. This man, even if he gets blocked, let's say if he gets held up, normally if a defensive lineman gets held up, the offensive lineman, they just stick him right there, can't move anywhere. I'm struggling. DJ Reader could get held up, he could get blocked, but he still controls the movement. He will still move his man laterally even if he's held up, but he also does a good job of ripping his man away free if the ball carrier enters his zone. When you talk about Mike Zimmer's defense and discipline and staying in your zone and helping out the other playmakers you have on defense, I think DJ Reader would be a fantastic fit for this Minnesota Vikings defensive line. But of course, I think Jalen Holmes and Armon Watts for peanuts compared to what DJ Reader and Javon Hargrave would make. I think they would be fine for your Minnesota Vikings defensive line. Defensive end is pretty simple. Replace Everson Griffin with Ifedi Odenigbo, and you'll be absolutely fine. Now, what's crazy is I talked about how Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, they have to be willing to make those necessary moves to free up cap space, to get the most, to optimize your roster. The problem with them is loyalty. So I think Mike Zimmer, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he talked about how, I expect Everson Griffin to come back. I mean, unless this dude is coming back for peanuts, what is the point? What you have replacements for defensive end. You could bring Stephen Weatherly back. I don't think he's going to break the bank in free agency. Everson Griffin, he's still going to command quite a bit of money. So in this year, this offseason where you have to free up every single nickel and dime that you can, the only reason is Everson Griffin just dire to have to keep on this roster? No, man, I just don't see it. But again, loyalty, you're going to have to bump that and look at production and replacements at the cheaper dollar. Cornerbacks. Gut feeling, I think the Minnesota Vikings are going to go cornerback in the first round, in which case I don't blame them. Years past, I say go for an offensive lineman in the first round. This year, I wouldn't blame them if they did that because cornerbacks, the cornerback group is in a far worse position than the offensive line is for your Minnesota Vikings. I think they're going to go corner in the first round. I think Trayvon Diggs is going to be that pick for them if he falls to 25. I'm going to do a Vikings draft wish list as far as players coming out of college entering the NFL draft. I'm going to do that leading up to the draft. I've got a lot to say about Trayvon Diggs, Antoine Winfield, and many more But let's say if they do decide to address the cornerback group, maybe bring in a cornerback through free agency, you could look at Chris Harris Jr., who is getting up there in age, but certainly is serviceable, or Cowboys cornerback Byron Jones. So those are the two guys that I'm looking at. And suddenly, all of a sudden, the Minnesota Vikings have a need at safety. Why? Why do you have a need at safety? Because Mike Zimmer said, quote, at the combine, I love Anthony. Speaking of Anthony Harris, I love Anthony. If he doesn't come back, I think he's earned everything he's got. But if you put up the positions most important on defense, is probably not going to be safety. Why would you say anything like that? Because you remember, I think it was the day before, Rick Spielman said, we're going to meet with the majority of our players' agents. So imagine if, assuming Anthony Harris' agent is one of them, and then the next day Mike Zimmer says this bullshit. I understand in a vacuum how you could say, well, safety isn't all that much important. However, with the players that you have in this cornerback group, with the shaky cornerback group that you have going into next season, you would think it would be best served to have a safety blanket over the top with Anthony Harris, especially if you're going to do gadget plays time and time again, every other play like you normally do with Harrison, Hitman Smith, bringing them up to the line of scrimmage, where oftentimes you have a lone safety over the top to be your last line of defense. So either the Vikings are going to address the safeties, the sudden need for the safety position through the draft, or you're going to bring in Andrew Sendejo, because you don't want to pay a safety, right? That's what you said, Mike Zimmer. So those are the free agents that I'm looking at. But overall, for me, it's left guard. I don't care if it's Joe Thuney or Graham Glasgow. You need to get one of those guys. Everybody else, I think you can pretty much make some replacements. Or in the case of cornerback, I think you can address it in the draft in the first round. Again, let me know your thoughts. Send your tweets out with the hashtag Modest Take. Who do you think that the Vikings should have as their number one free agency priority outside of the in-house free agents for your Minnesota Vikings? Hashtag Modest Take. The random winner selected will be announced next week's podcast, either Wednesday or Thursday. We do this during the off-season, once a week, mediocre at best sports podcast with Realistic Randy. Check me out on Twitter at realistic_Randy, Facebook at Realistic Randy. Major thanks to Modest Brewing. Super excited for this opportunity. We'll see you next week.